And we're back with a hot topic on the Constitution, line by line. Paul Fabrizio and I will,
and you are
Don Frazier,
oh,
will try to help decipher the second part of the Eighth Amendment, which is having to do with cruel and unusual punishment, but you see it most typically applied to the death penalty and whether it's cruel and unusual. But what's our line?
Okay, so the line is, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. So remember, the first part of the Eighth Amendment talked about no excessive bail, no excessive fines, and then the last part, no cruel and unusual punishment inflicted.
So how does the whole amendment read? I mean, if you read it top to bottom.
So excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted.
So I can see how they're all related.
Yeah, there's a commonality to it all.
Because excessive bails, excessive fines could be cruel and unusual too.
Right. And what the framers are doing is they're giving guidelines to judges across the country, to state legislatures, eventually, because this would eventually be incorporated into state constitutions as well. But they're giving everybody guidelines. Don't go crazy on your punishments.
Yeah.
The punishment, and this is the way it's phrased, the punishment has to fit the crime. And so immediately in our society, we think of cruel and unusual punishment. As you said, we think of the death penalty.
Correct.
But
what we're missing is chopping off hands, people having their tongues cut out, being thrown in an Iron Maiden, hung in a cage over the city wall. Gosh, what am I missing? Some thumb screws. Forgot about thumb screws. Branding.
All of those were punishments. Were they used all in Great Britain?
And they were also used in the United States from time to time, especially branding and cropping.
Okay, what's cropping?
Cutting a notch on the ear, so that way you can track this guy through society.
Really?
Oh,
Who did that?
Oh, like the state of Mississippi would do that.
Even after, this amendment?
Absolutely. There are American states where you could brand and crop.
Could you do it in Texas?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Can you do it today? And the answer is no.
The answer is no.
Thank
you have
God.
to brand yourself. Usually it's a fraternity prank. But, yeah, I mean, they would brand your cheek with a T for thief. And then the Army would brand you with a D for deserter.
Where would they put that?
Right there on your cheek or on your forehead. I mean, someplace where it was tough to hide.
Wow.
Yeah. So every time you went into a public house, everybody went,
deserter.
Yeah. Look at that guy. He is without honor.
We've moved away from that.
We have. But that was a reality in early America.
Okay. There is, among justices of the Supreme Court, a sense that our standards of decency are evolving.
In a good way.
Well, I hope it's in a good way.
Otherwise, I guess they would be devolving. But that's a judgment call.
So there's a sense that what was acceptable at one time is no longer acceptable today.
Sure.
So the punishments that you're describing are no longer acceptable, even though I could imagine sometimes, some cases, people would say, let's bring that back.
Sure.
But we've moved beyond that, these evolving standards of decency. And the focus right now on this cruel and unusual punishment, for the most part, is on the death penalty. So if it's all right, let's get into it.
Well, sure.
Is the death penalty, number one, is it a form of cruel and unusual punishment? And the Supreme Court is basically abiding by the words of the Constitution itself, where it talks about you can't take away someone's life, liberty, or property without due process.
Correct.
That means with due process, you can take away someone's life. So therefore, that sense,
liberty and property.
Right, but therefore that sense is that the death penalty is constitutional. And because it's constitutional, it's not cruel and unusual. But are there unusual and cruel ways to kill people?
Oh, sure. I mean,
for example,
if you go to North Korea,
okay,
and you cross the ruling regime, you may be staked out in the middle of a field, and have a mortar dropped on your head, mortar round.
Yes,
That's
target practice.
Yeah, that's a little weird. In ancient days, they would cover you with honey, put you in a bronze box, and let the bugs eat you. There's all sort. The human mind has no limit.
Yeah,
to cruelty.
that's true.
So that goes without saying that there is such a thing as cruel and unusual.
Okay.
It's interesting. There's also been attempts through history to try to make executions as uncruel as possible.
Correct. And that's actually the period of time where we're in now.
Well, I would argue that the guillotine
Okay, that's
was an attempt
Right.
to make it very scientific, because a lot of times when you're coming at somebody with an axe to chop off their head, they don't get the job done. Mary Queen of Scots comes to mind. Took several whacks, and she's gasping and sputtering as they're trying to hack through her neck. Yeah, and the guillotine was supposed to slice it off in just one great stroke, except when they cut off the King of France's head during the terror of the French Revolution, it got almost all the way through. The executioners had to go over there and put their weight on the blade to get it done. So there has been attempts to make it
right.
as regular as killing somebody can be. Did you know that the guillotine was the official method of execution of Nazi Germany as well?
No, I did not
Yeah,
know that.
so if you cross the state...
I thought you would be sent to a concentration camp and killed by gas.
Well, that's for a particular class of criminals.
Okay.
But if you're just a common criminal, or you're trying to, undermine the state, they would put you in a Gestapo prison. And
they would use the guillotine.
Yeah, so let's say you're a pure Aryan German. They're not going to send you to the gas chamber. They would take you into the basement.
Okay, but the Jews got the gas chamber.
Yeah, because they were not worthy.
Yeah.
And there was a bunch of them, and you had to... The idea was to exterminate them as efficiently as possible. That wasn't anything about jurisprudence or even due process in Nazi Germany. It was just killing people.
Okay, well, let's bring this back to the United States.
Bring it back to today.
Here in the United States, the Supreme Court has never ruled that any particular method of execution is cruel and unusual. They have ruled that killing certain classes of people are cruel and unusual.
So,
for example, people whose IQ is below 70.
Sure.
Also, young people who kill before the age of 17. Supreme Court has ruled that is cruel and unusual punishment.
Because they're not even aware.
They're not even aware of what they did, the consequences of what they've done.
Insane people.
Right. Well, the Supreme Court hasn't ruled against insane people, just against those with an IQ below 70. How do you define insane? Is really part of the problem there. And the key thing is, do they understand the punishment?
Yeah.
And for the Supreme Court, that seems to be what guides them. Do you understand the punishment? Now, in the United States today, as we speak, there's currently 5 methods of execution
I was going to ask you
that are constitutional.
So rattle them off.
Okay, well, the first is what we have here in Texas, lethal injection.
Okay,
there's also firing squad.
That's in Utah, I know that.
Okay, hanging.
Yep.
Electric chair.
Yep.
And gas chamber.
California does the gas chamber. Or at least they used to.
They used to. I don't know, because they so seldom do executions. But my understanding is that a couple states, all 5 of those are there as options, and I'm not sure who gets to choose.
Yeah.
But those are there. Other states, they limit it, and as we've moved to a more humane style of execution, most of the focus is on what we do here in Texas, which is lethal injection. When the federal government reinstated the death penalty, and they did this in time for Timothy McVeigh, who's responsible for the Oklahoma City bombing in '95.
At least he's the one that got pinned for it.
Yes. The federal government simply went to Texas, and they followed how Texas did it.
Really?
Because Texas executes more than any other state, And Texas executions have been challenged in so many ways, so many times before the Supreme Court, that it's pretty much a foolproof method or a challenge-proof method if we follow our procedures correctly. So the federal government simply adopted those methods.
Oh, wow, I didn't realize that.
And what it's led to, though, is concern now about lethal injection, and specifically the drugs that are used, and the fact that manufacturers have been under stockholder pressure and activist pressure to quit making those.
Yeah.
And so there's a potential for the drugs that are used for lethal injections to expire. You can only use them to a certain date. What
there's a shelf
afterwards?
life. Yeah, you can't just stockpile them.
So therefore, when they're expired, what do you use for lethal injections? Is there other drugs that you can use? Where do you get those drugs? Mm-hmm. And so that's really the next fight in the death penalty cases, is these other things. But I mean, if a state wants to use the electric chair, they can. If a state wants to bring back the guillotine, there's no case before the Supreme Court that says they can't. But will that be challenged before the Supreme Court?
Oh, absolutely.
You better believe it. And they're going to use this evolving standard of decency to say, look, this is cruel and unusual. And the big thing is, when was the last time the guillotine was used to kill somebody in the United States? And I have no idea.
I don't know that it's ever been used in the U.S.
Yeah, and by that very fact would make it unusual and therefore unconstitutional.
Have you ever known anybody that's been convicted of a capital crime?
I have, but not who has been executed, and you have.
I have.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to tell us?
Well, I mean, when I was in college, there was a fellow that was in a group that I was in. I mean, we weren't good friends, but we knew each other. And he was convicted of murdering two people that were out in a lover's lane situation, and smoked them both with a 9mm pistol. And the evidence all pointed to him, including his accomplice, who rolled on him and said, yeah, we were both there, but he did it. And he went through all the various appeals processes. It was probably about 6 years, 7 years between him being arrested in Mansfield, Texas, and him taking the gurney ride.
And when you think about it, that's actually really quick.
Relatively quick, yeah.
Yeah.
And I may be misremembering. It may have been even longer than that. Cause, I'm out of college in about 86, and he's probably executed, may have been 10 years.
Yeah, that would be closer to the average here in Texas. It's not unheard of for cases to take 20 years to work their way through the court system. And some would argue the very fact that you have to wait so long makes it a cruel and unusual
Well, that's what
punishment.
I was going to bring up, is that it seemed awfully cruel and unusual to drag it out as long as it did.
Right.
As long as it was. But how about incarcerating somebody for life? Okay. Is that cruel and unusual?
The court has never found that that's cruel and unusual again, except, and this is a recent development in the law, those who are under the age of 17 charged as adults with murder, sentenced to life in prison without parole.
Okay.
Is that cruel and unusual to have someone, you can't execute them, but
they're just caged for life.
Yeah. And they committed the crime so young. Is that good? Is that cruel and unusual is really the question.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
that's what struck me about a recent trip I took through Italy and looking at ancient Rome, is that you just don't find Roman prisons.
They would take care of the punishment.
They would
just
either
like that.
Yeah, they would try them. People would all know, and they would either be exiled or they would be thrown off the rock.
Yeah.
That's what is so unusual. When you read Scripture, and you've got Paul, in the dungeon asking for a coat. Well, he's not there for long.
Yeah. Yeah. In the United States, one reason it takes so long is you want to make sure you get it right.
Yeah, correct.
The argument before the Supreme Court could be summed up in a couple words. Death is final.
It is awfully final.
Any other punishment
Appeal
you
denied.
have, any other punishment you have doesn't necessarily mean it's final, because you can still live, you get another chance. But when you...
There'll be somebody from Northwestern University come in with, some sort of political science class or journalism class to try to spring you.
Yeah, but when you're convicted and executed, it's over.
It's done.
There's nothing that can be done. And what's taking place is, with DNA evidence, we're seeing a real revolution.
We are.
In the prosecution and defense of cases. And also, there's more and more research being done on memory.
Yeah.
Do we remember what we actually have seen? And that is being used in cases to really challenge some of the people who've been convicted. And, I mean, it's not hard to find. In Texas, believe it or not, is one of the leaders in this. In going back to some of these cases and saying, wait a second, we made a mistake. And here in Texas, you can be released and possibly get paid for each year that you were convicted.
For the reputation.
That you're in jail.
Yeah, for the reputation that this state has.
Yeah.
For being, rather backwards and rednecky in its approach to human affairs. We do a lot of things in Texas where we are really trying to get it right.
Yeah, exactly. And part of that, there is this fear that we have got it wrong in the past.
Correct.
There is an argument that at least one person here in Texas was executed who was not guilty. And
yeah, I mean, the guy that I knew maintained his innocence
all the way to the end.
To the very end. I mean, when they asked him for his final comment, he thanked the Dallas Cowboys for keeping him entertained while he was in the clink.
Wow.
Yeah, but maintained innocent all the way to the end.
Yeah. When you look at what the government is doing, and this whole look at the Constitution is an effort to look at what the government can do and can't do. Here we're talking about the ultimate government power, which is the power to kill.
Yeah.
And it's listed as a homicide. Okay, the state is murdering somebody.
Sure.
Okay, it's a legal murder, but they're murdering somebody. And so we have to make sure that we're going to do it in a way that's correct and make sure that we get the person who is supposed to be gotten.
It's an interesting collision between common law and this sort of higher level thinking about what's right. Mm-hmm. Sort of universal rights, human rights. Because common law says there's people that were born to be hanged. To paraphrase my grandfather. They're just not any good, and they haven't been good, and they were,
The psychopaths.
Yeah, sociopaths, yeah. And so we recognize the problem, but treating these people equitably in a way that we would ourselves want to be treated has always been the rub.
Right, and in a sense, we treat some of these people who've done horrible things the way we do to make sure we get it right, as a way to ensure that if we are caught, we are treated equitably too.
Yeah.
And that's really what this is all about. Yeah, there are some bad people. Some people do horrible things. But there also might be innocent people who are caught up. We've got to make sure we get it right.
Like the driver next to the guy that gets hit by the Hellfire missile. But that's a whole different story.
That is a whole different story. By the way, cruel and unusual punishment can also move beyond the death penalty. You were talking about thumb screws, for example. Occasionally there's cases that come up involving castration. And is castration...
And sterilization.
And sterilization has been taken off the books by the Supreme Court. It's no longer an acceptable punishment.
But castration is?
Castration...
It's still in the books?
Castration is still in the books. I believe there's 8 states where castration is an option. And the thinking behind it is it's available for those who commit child sex crimes as a way to blunt their sex drives. The idea behind it is that castration would make sure that they don't commit the crimes again. This, of course, is based on the theory that sex crimes are all about sex. There's a whole nother theory that sex crimes are also about power.
Oh, sure.
And if they're about power, then castration will have no effect on it
No, because there's always a broom handle or, some other terrible thing. Yes.
So, but castration still is one of those things. Does the state want to go in that direction? Does it want to offer it as an option? For example, someone who's convicted of child sex abuse. Well, you can keep them in prison for a period of time. Then you say, okay, we'll release you. Would you mind being castrated? Then,
Wow.
I mean, we could cut back on your time in prison.
But it'll cost you.
It'll cost you.
We'll get our pound of flesh,
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah. Do we want to do that? And that's
What
debate
states do that? Do you know?
Alabama, it's an option in Texas.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Alabama earlier this year had a big debate in their state legislature about it. And they've added, my understanding is they've added it as an option. Here in Texas, it's an option, is my understanding. But I don't know if people have actually done it.
Yeah.
And my understanding also is that the idea that it's about sex in terms of abuse really falls apart sometimes, because I understand that there has been at least one person who, after they were castrated, still went out and committed sex crimes.
Yeah. I can see that.
So, because for some,
the
it's about
psychology
power.
is
Yeah.
completely different than
Yeah.
yeah.
So, boy, we're delving into. But this is what the Constitution's about. The framers, when they wrote it, were very familiar with the kind of punishments that could be inflicted on people, and they wanted to limit that. And so, under our evolving standards of decency that the Supreme Court is using, where will it lead to? If we come back and do this in 15 years, what kind of punishments will no longer be acceptable? I don't know.
Yeah.
Will castration still be allowed? Will the death penalty still be allowed?
Gas chamber?
Gas
Firing
chamber?
squad?
I don't know. We'll see.
Wow. This has been a long one.
It
and an
has.
involved one.
Yes.
And a fairly gritty one.
Yes, and thank you for listening to it.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry,
appreciate
I hope
that.
you weren't having lunch or, trying to put the kids down for a nap.
Next
Yikes.
one will be a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Ninth Amendment.
Yeah, I'm ready for this one to go away. All right, so that's the end of the Eighth Amendment. It's necessary evil, I guess.
Yes, it is.
But
Part of the Constitution.
we'll be back with the Ninth Amendment next time.